Okay, now we're back. Lineage of Microsoft operating systems, right? All right, perfect. So let me just pop another slide in here real quick, which is this one maybe. That's probably a word. OSs. Ish. Okay, so we talked last time about kind of our first Microsoft OS, right? DOS. And shut up! You've said more words than I have so far. All right, so we told a little story about DOS, how Microsoft licensed it to IBM, then went and had to buy the operating system, and blah, blah, blah. Hence was probably the most profitable deal in history, at least up to this point. So after DOS, you had a bunch of different versions of DOS. DOS 1, 2, 3, DOS 6.2, blah, blah, blah. What's the next major operating system that you remember from Microsoft? It's a trick question. We'll see if somebody was listening last time to know why this is a trick question.
They don't actually make the operating system. I don't know.
So we're talking about Windows, right? That's probably what I'm expecting you to say here. That's what we're going to end up putting here. But is Windows an operating system? So it's a distribution. Okay, the actual core operating system of Windows is DOS. But for the sake of this, we're going to interchangeably refer to those. But factually speaking, the actual operating system is DOS for Windows up to a point. The actual operating system for Linux is the Linux kernel. The actual operating system for the Macintosh computer, anybody know what that is? For OS X, the modern... it is Unix. Do you know which Unix, perchance? It's an OpenBSD kernel. It's the version of OpenBSD. Was made in Berkeley in first kernel, I think, was maybe 92. Like 12% certain that's right. So take that for what it is. But it definitely came out of Berkeley. Okay, so after DOS, what we're calling the next operating system is Windows what? There was a couple in there, but really the first mainstream was Windows 3.1, right?
I remember running that.
Okay. Who in here has run Windows 3.1 before?
Loud.
What was before 3.1?
Nothing graphical. Okay. So for those of you who have run Windows 3.1, what were the what was that experience like? What was the limitation of Windows 3.1? Okay, think about that. We'll pause it, keep going, I'll come back to it. Yeah, you only run one program at a time. Okay, so what came after Windows 3.1?
You want to say Windows 3.2.
Next major thing you remember? Probably Windows 95?
Yes. Which is awful.
Now, what was the major difference between Windows 95 and Windows 3.1? Well, the starting point was the interface, right? Windows 95 represented that start menu-based interface that existed all the way up until today. Slight little changes with Windows 8, but didn't they throw the start menu back in an update?
Yeah, they're going.
Okay, yeah. Too many people complained. Grandpa didn't know how to use it. Okay, so Windows 95 represented a major update in the interface, an update that's still alive today. But there was actually, from a technology, so that's a user interface perspective. From a technology perspective, there was a major update with Windows 95 compared to Windows 3.1. That's multitasking. Okay, in Windows 3.1, you can have one program running at a time. Similarly, DOS allowed you to run one program at a time. So if you were using a text editor in DOS, you weren't doing anything else. Good news is email didn't exist yet. So you're good there. You didn't have to check your email. So really, this is multitasking / new UI. It's the big deal there. But the question is was there anything in between here? We're actually missing an operating system here from Microsoft. Go ahead. That's going to be later on in this list, not in between those two. So something came out after Windows 3.1, but before Windows 95 came out. It actually represented a split in Microsoft's business model.
Isn't it the server version?
Okay. You're going along the right lines. So that one, they only started calling them whatever server more recently. Back then it was Windows NT 3.51 was the kind of the release one for the one that people actually ran. But now, what's the difference between Windows 3.1 and Windows NT? These are not the same operating systems. Windows 3.1, the actual operating system was DOS. Windows NT, the actual operating system was the NT kernel. New Technology Kernel.
Is that what it stands for?
That's what it stands for. NT is New Technology. Interestingly enough, this is the actual first operating system Microsoft wrote. Because DOS they bought. Which is, I mean, not a big deal. Companies do that all the time now, right? You know, if Apple or Google, they may want a new technology integrated into something, what do? They can either A, invent it themselves, or write it themselves, or they can go buy a company that's already doing it and have it today. Which makes more sense. You need a new hard drive for your computer. Do you head out to the garage and build one, or do you order it off Newegg? You buy it, right? It's one of the benefits of having zillions of dollars these big companies have is they can acquire other companies. It's actually also a lot of the reason why a lot of companies even come out with their ideas. When a new company, for those of you who are kind of entrepreneurial, if you know me, I'm kind of a serial entrepreneur. I'm always part of a different startup and stuff like that. A lot of companies, when they first build out their business model, they're not even thinking about how are we going to make money. They're thinking about how do we flip this business to one of the big boys. Make it interesting enough that Facebook wants to buy us or Google wants to buy us, something like that. So a lot of these companies, they invented themselves with the hope they could sell it to one of the big boys. Okay? So Windows NT 3.51 was actually the birth of the new operating system from Microsoft, the NT kernel. Windows 95 came out after Windows NT. What was the operating system of Windows 95? 50-50 shot. How many of you in here ran Windows 95? Should be more hands than the previous question. Okay. Well, here's a hint. Was there Windows NT releases after Windows 95? There was. Was there Windows releases after Windows 95? There was. So this guy's still stuck with DOS. DOS was still the core operating system. But they actually renamed that operating system. It was no longer called DOS here. It was called the 9X kernel. Okay? So now they have two operating systems. They have the NT kernel and they have the 9X kernel, which is just a cool way of saying DOS. Okay, and that's when they changed the thing in the accessories, so it was no longer the DOS prompt, now it was the command prompt. Okay. It's just a word thing, nothing really actually changed. Okay, after 95, next operating system in the pecking order by release date.
98.
Well, it starts with Windows. Windows NT 4.0. Now, I'll give you a guess. What was the operating system behind this one? NT kernel. Okay. What was the big thing that was released in Windows NT 4.0? What was the biggest bump, biggest update between NT 3.51 and NT 4? Let me go back for a second here. We said Windows 3.1 was not multitasking, correct? Okay. Windows 3.51 was. Kind of a rudimentary multitasking, but it did support multitasking. You can have more than one program open at once. So bridging between those two operating systems was when Microsoft added to their operating system, or at least augmented an older operating system, to support multitasking. Windows 95, brand new interface, so made Windows 3.1 look nice. Windows NT 3.51 looked like Windows 3.1. So these guys right here had, let's call it the same interface. Windows 95 had the interface, a brand new interface, but had the multitasking from NT. Okay? Windows NT, do you think it still had multitasking? What was NT lacking before? The nice interface. Windows NT has the Windows 95 interface, the start menu based interface. So that's really what came with this distribution. Okay, now I really want us to think about these as two distinct lines of operating systems. Anything that says DOS or 9X kernel next to it is the consumer operating system. Anything that says NT next to it is their business operating system. Okay? Kind of if I'm going to add a little line in here, just for history's sake, Windows 3.11 for workgroups was a release after Windows 3.1. That was kind of the bridge in between. This was as networking started coming into play. Not the internet, but having computers linked together inside of an office or something like that. This kind of was the birth pains of the NT kernel. Microsoft saw a need for creating a brand new operating system specifically for businesses. Now, if you just taking a little segue off of that, if you're the operating system designer, what goals are different between a consumer operating system and a business operating system? So when you have a business and you have your computers running in the business, what's important to the business? Stability? Computers can't crash, right? Time is money. You know, the productivity can't get hurt, blah, blah, blah. Okay? What isn't important in the business? Security should be important. Okay?
Now.
Security is important. What about gaming? Stuff like that. Do businesses really care whether or not their employees can play Battlefield? Generally speaking, no, right? Okay. So this really came into something, and it's something we're going to talk about later in this course. Part of an operating system, modern operating systems, are drivers, hardware drivers. You know, so when you go out and you buy a new video card and you stick it in your computer, it comes with some software that teaches your computer how to run that card. Drivers are a much more modern invention than back then. Operating systems had all the stuff built into them back then, at least in the early days of this list. That means if you went out and got the latest, greatest $500 graphics card today, and you installed it in a machine running DOS, it would detect it as a generic VGA graphics card. You would get none of the power out of it because the operating system didn't know how to take advantage of all that extra stuff. Because the operating system came out way, way, way before that new piece of hardware came out. I guarantee if you took a computer today that had the latest ATI or NVIDIA graphics card in it, and you went back and you installed DOS 6.0 on that computer as your operating system, it would work just fine. Because somewhere at the very, very, very core of that graphics card is VGA compatibility, which is a standard. Okay? And you've probably seen this before if you've ever installed a brand new high-end graphics card. When you first put it in your computer, it's like super low resolution, like 8-bit color or something like that, until you download the latest NVIDIA drivers and all of a sudden the thing turns into a rock star, right? Okay, but when you first put it in, it's like, this is what I detected. Crappy graphics card. Thank you for giving Best Buy your $1,000. Okay. KK, thanks. So here, anything we see DOS or 9X kernel, we want to think consumer operating systems. Anything we see NT, we want to think business operating systems. There was a split here. So consumer really needed to have support for things that people wanted to do out of the home. Productivity was there, so we had to have software support for that, but you also had to have support for peripherals, game controllers. Back then, it was, flight simulators were coming out, and you had to have the yokes for flying your flight simulator. USB didn't exist yet, but peripherals like new kinds of mice with extra buttons on them, things like that. You can kind of go down the path and kind of see where things are going. NT didn't have anywhere near the number of drivers. 95 really was an introduction into drivers that you can install third-party after the fact to allow you to take an operating system that came out a year ago and have it run hardware that came out a week ago in full service. NT 4.0 also supported those drivers, but these are two separate operating systems. So you almost need to think about these guys in terms of when a video game comes out for PC and you have to wait for it to come out for Mac. So if they were going to write drivers for your latest, greatest NVIDIA graphics card, they're going to write it for the 9X kernel first. And then they can decide if they're ever going to write it for the NT kernel. Because that's likely not something that businesses are going to buy. Businesses typically don't have a need for these high-end graphics cards. Except for maybe graphic-based businesses, right? But generally speaking, so a business office is probably running Office. Microsoft Office, maybe Access, something like that. Okay, so NT4 had the 95 interface with the multitasking that it kept from NT 3.51. Okay, next in the lineage. Windows 98. What was the difference between Windows 95 and Windows 98? Anything major?
3.
the 98 minus 95 is 3, exactly. I would say it's fair to say there was more consumer hardware support. But generally speaking, it was just a refreshed version of 95.
So I was right.
Ish. And this was running the 9X kernel. So new technology in the kernel, new technology in the operating system, largely under the hood. Most people who are running 95 probably didn't notice substantial changes between 95 and 98. A couple interface, maybe updates, things maybe looked a little slicker because their operating systems were, or our hardware was faster, so we were able to take advantage of some of that performance, stuff like that. Okay, what came after 98?
It was either Windows 2000 or Millennium
Windows 2000. What was the kernel for Windows 2000? .50 shot.
Is it still the
One would think.
because they don't update.
If you look at all of these things here, Windows NT, we always use the word NT, or yeah, we'll say it's a word. NT, all of those had NT kernels. Everything else, it had numbers next to it, was the 9X kernel. Windows 2000 was the NT kernel. Now, this was actually a fiasco. Because imagine, I mean, this is back when you didn't download, you wouldn't download Windows 2000. You would still go and see it at Best Buy and buy it there, bring it home on disk. So imagine you're in Best Buy, you see a box for Windows 2000, you think, oh, this is the upgrade to Windows 98. You take it home, you install it, and all of a sudden none of your games work. All the graphics drivers support, things like that were there in Windows 98 as the consumer operating system, were not there in Windows 2000 because it was a business operating system. So this is a naming convention issue where people did not necessarily upgrade from NT4 to 2000, but people from 98 upgraded to 2000 initially because they were tricked into thinking that this was actually the newest consumer operating system. Having said that, arguably Windows 2000 is arguably one of the best operating systems Microsoft has come out with. There are still businesses today running Windows 2000. Very, very, very good operating system. So I'm going to leave that there for now. We're going to come back to it here in a second. But that is definitely one of their business operating systems, not the consumer operating systems. All right, what's next? You mentioned Windows Millennium, right?
Millennium Edition,
Windows ME. And what was the difference between 98 and ME?
games
Okay, well, which kernel was this?
for it have to be the consumer.
Yep, this is the 9X kernel. All right. And what was the difference between 98 and ME? Well, if you ask consumers of the day, they would have said, well, 98 worked, ME didn't. In fact, most companies, Dell being an example, when they sold a new laptop that came with Windows Millennium, they offered a free upgrade to Windows 98.
Yeah.
True story. They actually called it an upgrade. Windows Millennium was a fiasco. Not well received. Was supposed to fix all these problems, have all this consumer support stuff for home entertainment crap, and nothing worked. It was broken. All right, so Windows ME largely died, and people rolled back to Windows 98. Next operating system.
2003.
Nope.
XP? No.
Yep.
XP.
Yep.
Yeah.
Windows XP. Which kernel was Windows XP?
Since everything worked, I would assume it was the consumer.
Very interesting move here. Microsoft decided, hey, well, we did so well with our previous 9X kernel-based operating system that people went back to the previous one. What is Windows XP? Windows XP is Windows 2000 with driver support. They merged their consumer and their business lines together into one operating system. It's fair to say Windows XP is one of the most successful operating systems from Microsoft. In fact, I would venture that there are some people in this room today that are still running XP. Is that a true statement? Yes? One, maybe one, two?
Yeah.
Okay. So XP is still a viable operating system even today. You know, you can get XP and new games come out, you can run them on XP just fine. All right. Next came out, you mentioned Windows 2003. This is running the Windows NT kernel. Now, what was the difference between XP and 2003? Could somebody have gotten Windows 2003? This is really 2003 server, is what they were called. Could somebody have downloaded Windows 2003 server and used it as a consumer operating system? Play video games on it and stuff like that? Yeah, absolutely. Really, 2003 server was an updated version of Windows XP, so basically all the service packs applied to it, with some additional software built into it for server type stuff, for running servers, for sharing, network resources, things like that. So it was meant to be a distribution built on top of an updated Windows XP that was meant to be installed in business server type situations. Okay? Most businesses would have used Windows XP. The same operating system you're using at home as a consumer. All right. What came out next? Next release was a little rocky. Vista. Windows Vista. NT kernel. Now, what was wrong with Windows Vista? It has this stigma that it was terrible, right? How many of you ran Windows Vista? Okay. What was wrong with it?
The operating system was generally okay. It was just that the hardware wasn't up to date enough to be compatible. Most hardware.
Okay, I think that at least the first part of your statement's correct. There was nothing really wrong with the operating system. There might have been some hardware issues, but generally the biggest complaint about it was it was inconvenient to use. Why? Why was it inconvenient? What happened between Windows XP and Windows Vista? What did they really throw into Vista? What problem were they trying to fix? You remember the I'm a Mac, I'm a PC commercials? The time of Vista was out, Apple was making fun of Microsoft, and they had the PC guy standing there with like a Secret Service agent standing next to him. Remember that? Microsoft, being the largest, more people were using Windows-based operating systems than any other operating system in the world, by a lot. It's not like, it was kind of 50-50 Mac versus PC. No, it was like 96% PC, and then this little group of people using Mac, and then an even tinier group using Linux. That's the world we lived in. So Microsoft was a huge target. How many of you have heard people, Mac enthusiasts say something like, well, viruses don't exist for Mac? That's one of their selling points, right? It's like, well, you can't get a virus with a Mac because it's so good, right? Now, I might make the argument that the modern day Macintosh operating system being built on Unix might inherently be more secure than the NT kernel. But we're not talking about like 96% more secure. Let's call it 10% more secure. Okay? Why are there no viruses for the Mac? Go ahead. Not as many users. If you're somebody who writes viruses, you want to attack groups of people, right? Not the 8 guys running the Mac. Okay? You want to attack the zillions of people running the PC, running Windows. So that's why Microsoft had so many viruses, is because there were so many users. They were the bigger target. So that's why people wrote viruses for Windows, not the Mac. All right, having said that, When Vista came out, Vista had all sorts of security stuff built into it, to the point that it was inconvenient to use, because every single time you tried to do something, it asked you, are you sure you want to do this? And then when you said yes, you said, are you really sure? It would ask you like a second time. And, I mean, you were held hostage by your operating system. The operating system itself was fine. There really wasn't anything inherently wrong with it. But it was so inconvenient to use that people either A, stopped using it, or B, went in and disabled, what was it called, Sentinel? Disabled that piece of software that asked them multiple questions, taking away all those security layers. Okay? So a lot of people rolled back to XP, said, oh, this is just better. When really there was nothing wrong with Vista, it was just inconvenient. And if you remember back to one of our previous slides, users want convenience, ease of use. Kind of broke one of our rules of operating systems, right? All right, so what came after Vista? Let's just stick with what we think is our consumer lines. There was Windows 2007 server and crap like that. Those are just software patches on top of the consumer operating system. What was the next consumer operating system? Most of you, or at least many of you, are still running this one. Windows 7. Okay, this is the NT kernel. And what was the difference between Windows 7 and Windows Vista? It did have the security features. You might say that Windows 7 was Windows Vista done right. So Windows 7 has the same security features, or many of them, probably more of them than Vista did, but it did it in such a way where it made most of the decisions on its own. Didn't ask you, didn't ask you multiple times, even asked you once sometimes. It just said, oh, you're trying to do this? I'm okay with that. I think the normal user would probably say that's fine. So rather than making you click OK, we'll just do it. So it tried to protect you, but in a convenient way. Most people who installed Windows 7 would have said Windows 7 was a good operating system, right? How many of you are still running 7 today? Many of you? Okay. So, you could argue that Windows 7 was every bit as successful as Windows XP. I think it's a reasonable argument. Certainly, these guys were very strong releases by Microsoft. And then more recently, we have Windows 8, also built on the NT kernel. And, let's say the jury's still out on Windows 8. There isn't real issues with Windows 8. It's stable. It's a good operating system. Biggest change, obviously, was the interface. Right? User interface was a pretty substantial change. Which kind of turned a lot of people off because it's a little bit difficult to learn to use initially. Why do you think they changed that interface up? What was the rationale behind that?
So they can use it on tablets as well.
Okay. Microsoft really was trying to create this kind of single world type situation where they wanted something that was compatible with a touch interface, being able to use it on tablets, things like that, as well as smartphones. Anybody in here have a Windows 8 smartphone? Really, the interface for their smartphone OS looks very, very similar to their tablet and, to Windows 98, or I'm sorry, Windows 8. I think they're really going to this single operating system, learn the OS once, and be able to use it across the board. But they're also sticking with this idea that sometimes a mouse and keyboard are necessary. Anybody in here happen to have a Microsoft Surface tablet? Or at least aware of them. We've seen the commercials and stuff like that. Okay, so what's the Surface tablet? Surface tablet is essentially something akin to an iPad, right? But running a desktop operating system like Windows 8, looks like Windows 8. But it has the cover is actually a detachable keyboard, right? And it also has USB ports so you can plug a mouse in and stuff like that. So it's a hybrid between a tablet and a full PC. What are the problems with the Surface tablets? There's actually two versions of the Surface tablets. There's the professional version, and there's the, I guess, the normal version. What's the difference between those two? We're kind of going way, almost repeating history with compatibility issues. The normal version of the Surface runs, but an ARM processor, different processor. Okay, so it's running actually a version of Windows 8 called Windows 8 RT. And Windows 8 RT looks just like Windows 8, except it was built for ARM processors, which is actually a RISC processor, which you'll learn about in the architecture class, reduced instruction set processor. So different technology than Intel. Okay? Problem is, let's take our, if you take 10 people who are all running Windows, there's probably a collection of a couple of pieces of software that all 10 of them have, right? Probably pretty much everybody has Microsoft Office. Pretty much everybody has, what would be another application that everybody would have? That's part of Office. But you get what I'm saying. There's going to be a collection of software that pretty much everybody has. Maybe Office just being the best example. Well, when RT first came out, there was no version of Office that would run on RT. Because Office was a piece of software written for Intel. Now, Microsoft Office was actually written using .NET. The newest version of Microsoft Office was written using .NET. And if you remember, we probably talked about this in the 250 class, maybe 200 as well. .NET really was born out of a necessity to compete with Java, right? And Java's flagship feature is that it's platform independent. So you write the program once, it runs on any machine that supports the Java virtual machine. .NET says, hey, we're platform independent as well. We run on any machine that happens to have the .NET component architecture. So basically, we run on any machine that is Windows, because we didn't write the .NET component architecture for Mac. They also didn't write the .NET component architecture initially for RT. So they had to do that. They had to port the .NET component architecture to run on their ARM processor for Windows RT. So that became kind of a sticking point for the success of the Surface tablets. Probably released too early, really, to be well adopted because of that. Certainly from a price point, people wanted to get the RT, the normal version of it, rather than the professional version of it. Yet the software they really wanted to use wasn't available. Big problem. Now, beyond that, so let's take the Pro version of the Surface, which is running a full version of Windows 8. Pro version of the Surface was kind of a failure as well. All your software worked, but it was kind of a underperforming machine. It was because it was a hybrid between a tablet and a laptop, let's say. It needed to solve this problem of we need to be fast, but at the same time we need to have reasonable battery life. And that's very hard to do when you're saying we need to look like a tablet. Little tiny thin tablet looking thing that doesn't have a real big battery in it, relatively speaking, compared to laptops. Okay, but we're going to put a relatively high horsepower processor in there because Windows 8 is not a lightweight operating system. It requires some reasonable horsepower to run it at a decent speed. So we're going to put this guy in there. And now we're draining battery like crazy. So we need to take some other shortcuts. So we're going to put less memory. We're going to put a smaller hard drive. So now you have this really underpowered Windows 8 laptop that just happens to be very portable. Or we can go to the RT side and have a much more balanced tablet that doesn't run any software. You got Those are your two worlds. Most of that has been fixed at this point. I would say the newer Surface tablets are significantly better products, more applicable to the real world. But the question is, have they missed the boat? You can make a very similar argument with Windows Mobile. How many of you in here have used a Windows Mobile phone? Windows 8 Mobile. They're actually quite good. Most people who have a Windows 8 phone are fairly happy with it. They like the features, they like the interface. Certainly there's things they say about it that they like better than Android or iOS. So arguably it's a legitimate contender, right? But they missed the boat. Do you see Windows 8 ever really making a dent in the mobile market? Your two big players are iOS and Android, right? And that's the way it's going to be. Nobody else is... There's no room for a third. Microsoft's this little tiny guy over on the side that, through their marketing, is going to pick up a couple of people that will regret it later. But it's not because the operating system is poor. It's the adoption rate so low, so the number of apps is low, and all this other stuff has a spill-through effect. So they missed the boat, is the punchline. Okay, so questions about the Microsoft operating system lineage. Any surprises in there?
Surprising how long it takes between versions for Windows.
Okay.
I mean, I know they're writing a lot of...
Well, let me ask this. Did we even, from a perception perspective, did we need a Windows 8? Or were people still pretty happy with Windows 7?
I still use Windows 7.
Why was there the perception that we needed a Windows 8? Really, it's a competition thing, right? Every year, Apple's coming out with an update to, Mac OS X. It's come up with another name for a cat, right?
Mavericks is not real high. Mavericks.
Did you see the keynote, though, when they announced Mavericks? They ran out of cats. They had Mountain Lion. They had Lion, and they had Mountain Lion. So, Apple was saying, we have our new operating system we're going to announce. This was real, not a joke thing like on Conan or something, but it was real. So Apple actually has an interesting sense of humor. So they're up there, and they're saying, we were trying to come up with names, but, we were really running short on cats.
Snow leopard.
So, they said, they put up there, Mac OS X, Sea Lion. And they had a sea lion with like a big, the beach ball. So they decided to go more towards things that are part of the technology community. So Mavericks refers to these waves off the San Francisco shore. So that's where that came from. It actually represents something. But in any case, every single year Apple's releasing a new operating system, right? Sometimes these operating systems are substantial hardware changes. Sometimes they're substantial interface changes. But really, when you say substantial interface changes, what Apple has been doing over the last several years at least is moving the iPad operating system, iOS, and their desktop operating system, OS X, closer and closer together. So features from one start bleeding into the other. So instead of Microsoft, which made the move of saying, we're going to make one operating system that runs across all of our stuff, Apple's saying we still have two distinct operating systems because that makes more sense because they've really stuck with iPad and iPhone being touch interface only. No mouse, keyboard, well, keyboard yes, but no mouse required for using the iOS devices. But we still need a mouse for our desktop devices. But there's things in the middle. There's crossover between those. So Apple's taking a little bit different approach than Microsoft has in terms of merging those two together. But when you see your major competitor in operating systems, where Apple, from an operating system adoption perspective, is the fastest growing company in history since Microsoft. They are cutting into Microsoft's chunk. They will never overtake Windows desktop share. But they are clearly starting to overtake, well, definitely have overtook them in the mobile space, right? And now you see more and more people showing up to school and stuff like that with Apple laptops. So certainly in the mobile computing space, Apple has a lead on most companies. So you're really seeing this probably growing into more of a mobile interface, so it won't even be a competition for Microsoft anymore. This is going to be kind of a new product line. But they still have that pressure of every single year you have the other guy coming out with a new operating system. You know, and now what's Apple doing? Their new operating systems are all free. They forget to tell you that their hardware is expensive.
Yeah.
But the argument I make for technologists, just to finish up class today, is you know, for those of you who are in the market for a new computer, I would highly recommend you look at a Mac. Not because Macs are better than PCs. As technology majors, you're getting 2 computers for the price of 1.7. A Mac can run both Windows and the Macintosh operating system, so you have one computer that can run all your software you might need while you're in school, blah, blah, blah. So it gives you a lot of flexibility for the price of 1.7 computers. So really, you're saving 30% by buying a Mac. Now, should Grandpa get a Mac? Grandpa's checking his email and crap like that. Go and buy the budget pleaser HP, or get him a tablet. You know, I'd say an iPad, but whatever, some tablet. That's the correct tool for the job. But for technology majors, I think a Mac is the better tool because it gives you the full flexibility. All right, I will see everybody on Friday. There's a chance you might have a quiz related to this Windows, Microsoft lineage crap. I'll see y'all then. Videos are up on Angel now, so you can follow the link if you want to put yourself to sleep with my lectures.